and welcome to the MSTieCast. I'm Toby Mobius.
I'm Joshua M.
MacLeod. And welcome back, friend. It's been a while.
It's good to be back.
Yes. Since the Jackie Naiman interview, I believe.
Yes.
And what an interview it was.
What it is.
Well, we're not talking about Jackie Naiman today, I think.
Nope.
We are joined by Mr. Daniel Griffith, whose Kickstarter for Celluloid Wizards and the video Wasteland is actually just met its $25,000 goal, but there's 38 hours to go as of this recording. So if you want to donate, or if you want to donate after you listen to this, please do it. So welcome, Mr. Griffith.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
It's a pleasure having you. So I'm just going to get straight into it. How did you get into Mystery Science Theater 3000?
It's kind of an interesting story. I was in the process of gathering interviews for a K. Gordon Murray documentary, which was really my first documentary on a subject relating to film history versus documentaries I'd done in the past were more or less historical documentaries about Civil War or something like that for different broadcasting stations. And I wanted to kind of fuse my love for cinema history with my love for documentaries, and I picked a subject matter that was just really obscure, almost to the point where finding someone to talk about it, an authority, or tracking down the people that knew K. Gordon Murray personally, it was almost, I would say nearly impossible. It was improbable. And as I was gathering the stuff and gaining some momentum, I'd released a little teaser trailer online to kind of generate a little buzz, and that attracted Shout Factory, who just acquired Mystery Science Theater and were starting the process of distributing episodes, beginning with that 20th anniversary set. And they said, okay, we're going to do a K. Gordon Murray release of Santa Claus, and would you be interested in doing some kind of bonus feature for it? And they, at that point, they just thought I would edit together an interview and give it to them, and that would be an interview featurette. And instead, I put together Santa Claus Conquers the Devil. And so it was a little featurette, and I had a little fun with it. And they really loved the idea of a documentary that was talking about the movie, not talking about Mystery Science. They thought that was a cool idea, and I agreed. I felt like these were movies that would never get a special edition DVD or Blu-ray release. And so this is an opportunity to do a documentary about these, unsung, orphaned, somewhat misunderstood movies. That particular one came out on the set, and everybody seemed to respond to it. And so from that point on, Shout was just like, okay, here's the 4 titles, do a documentary about one of them. And so the next set I picked was Beast of Yucca Flats, and I did a little doc on Beast of Yucca Flats, and that began a, going on 7-year relationship with Best Brains, Shout Factory, and of course a lot of the alums from the series.
Very cool. Were you a fan of the show before you started doing the documentaries, or did it come about through the documentaries?
No, I was a huge fan of MST dating back to the Comedy Central days. However, my cable provider in the small town I was growing up in didn't have Comedy Central. So I had a friend who would generate the tapes for me, so to speak. So, he would record them for me and give them to me, and I would watch the episodes, and then he would record the next ones and so forth. And I kept the ones that I really loved, that I knew I was going to watch over and over, and then I would just give him the tape back to record the next ones on if I just thought the episode was good, but not one I wanted to hang on to. Just that kind of kept generating until I went away to film school and would try to catch the new incarnation that would be happening on Sci-Fi. I would try to catch it when I could, but I was pretty busy with both school and work, and then doing internships on motion pictures and television and stuff like that. So I just didn't have the opportunity to catch as much, but I would start catching it periodically, when I would call friends and say, hey, do you have those episodes? You'd email me, VHS copies and so forth. But that was something I was always a fan of. And it was really, I was a fan of the show just because I was a fan of B movies in general. And So, this show was doing something that I would kind of do with some friends when we would watch stuff that would play on late night TV and stuff like that.
You said you got into it through the the Comedy Central era. Did you start with Joel or Mike?
Well, I kind of started at the tail end of Joel, and then, they'd give you an idea, and I'd have to really think back, but it was kind of strange is I would watch the Joel stuff, and then the transition to Mike happened so fast when I started. It didn't occur to me that there was a shift in hosts. It just happened. I mean, it was kind of okay, so here's this guy. I mean, so maybe there's another guy going to pop up anytime, kind of thing. It wasn't until I kept bugging my friend for past episodes that I started really catching up with the Joel stuff. Unfortunately, from where I was, I mean, getting something like Comedy Central was pretty complicated. So, I guess at that time we didn't have that age where, today we can discover everything just by looking on our computer. At that time, you really had to kind of be in the know or have certain kind of connections or stumble upon something in a magazine. People don't realize how good they have it now, where everything is accessible. You can watch just about anything and never leave your home. So to me, it's a different time.
What a time to be a movie dork.
It was like you had to earn a badge. If you knew what Mystery Science Theater was, you were one of the cool people. You were connected in some way.
See, the thing is, I didn't get into the show until well after it went into the internet age. I got into the show in late middle school, early high school, thereabouts. For the record, I'm 22. I'm easily one of the youngins who got into the show well after the fact. Currently is probably one of the people throwing the most money at the show to come back, because there really is nothing like it. There's riff tracks, but that's not TV show. Now, you said you really didn't notice the host changeover. With time, which one do you say prefer, Joel or Mike?
That sounds like a loaded question. I don't know if I could really give you an answer.
That's because it is a loaded question.
If you say the wrong one, you will be ejected into sharks with laser beams.
I can't say it. I think Mike and Joel, they brought something unique, their own stamp. And let's be fair. Mike was around through this whole series for the most part. I mean, he was really there. So he maybe wasn't in front of the camera all the time, but he was there. And Joel would be the first person to speak on his behalf, recognizing his genius as a writer and certainly as a comedian. Here's the other thing. I mean, I've done work with both of them. I love hanging out with Joel, because hanging out with Joel as Joel is almost like hanging out with Joel as his MST persona. So if you watched the show when you were younger, it's like I'm hanging out with this fictional character, but he really isn't a fictional character at all. Joel's an amazing guy. I think the world of him. And I can't answer the question in a way that, I guess would not be throwing myself under the bus. My favorite episode, or at least my first two favorite episodes, are Mike episodes. So.
And I mean, that's a fair answer. And I'll go and tell you, I prefer Joel as a host, but most of my favorite episodes are Mike. Over Mike's tenure, the riffing got much more solid than it had been in previous seasons, because it was a show that was constantly evolving and constantly getting better.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. I hear a lot of people favor one host, but have favorite episodes in the other category, if that makes sense.
My favorite Mike episodes are probably Soul Taker and Werewolf, seasons 10 and 9, because they're really strong riffed episodes, and of course Joel is in one of them, so of course that's one of my favorites. But Joel has very strong episodes too, because Mike was also there, and Mike's a fantastic comedy writer.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess it really just comes down to the combination. My favorite, and this is kind of nutty, because as I work on the Mystery Science Theater sets, and I meet a lot of different fans, and I do a lot of shows, and I do a big Mystery Science Theater event at DragonCon in Atlanta. I talk to a lot of Mysties out there, and I tell them my favorite episode, my number one favorite episode, they kind of shrug a little bit. But I think the reason why it's my favorite is because it was one of the few episodes where I felt like I couldn't stop laughing. And it might have been because I was attracted to the genre of the film in the first place. The closest to my ultimate favorite, but I really don't have an ultimate favorite, just like I don't really have an ultimate favorite motion picture in general. But I'm a big fan of Deathstalker 3.
Nice.
See? Shrugs.
I said nice.
Yeah. But it's, for some reason, that episode just kind of works. Especially if you're familiar with, like, Ren Fair jargon, because, I mean, it makes you feel special when you're watching something and this group of characters are just throwing out comments that are very insider. It makes you feel like you're hanging out with your friends. I think that's kind of the magic of Mystery Science Theater, and I think it's why so many people relate to it, is because they really did have their finger on the pulse of pop culture, and not only that, but just various different trends and what would make up those trends, and, you know, how would those people that are fans of certain things communicate? What would be their insider jargon? That one does, and I am a big fan of Santa Claus.
I wonder why. Sorry.
Well, what's weird is when I started K. Gordon Murray, the documentary about his life, you know, I knew about Santa Claus and a lot of the Mexican horror films that were dubbed and released by him. I knew about them because of different midnight movie shows that would play in my hometown as a part of local stations. And so I was familiar with them. And then when they came on Mystery Science, it was like Mystery Science reminded me of those movies. And I think that's where the importance of Mystery Science Theater plays. I mean, there's people that are always kind of on the fence of whether or not Mystery Science Theater is an ingenious concept and a very, very successful, you know, comedic approach to watching B movies. But there are other people that are very protective of the movies and consider what they're doing to be a disservice. And I kind of fall a bit in between. I mean, I look at what Mystery Science Theater does as what certain comedians do with political humor. Mm-hmm. You know, the situation that they're cracking jokes about may be serious, and that's fine. But they're making light of something because they're kind of trying to show us this from a different perspective. Sure, it's probably not good to laugh about some injustice somewhere in the world, or maybe it is. Maybe it is good to laugh about how ridiculous the whole Starbucks thing is. But at the same time, you know, there are people that, you know, that is very important to them, and it's a touchy subject, and it's kind of unique that Mystery Science does channel that same kind of debate.
It's a very interesting perspective. I never would have likened the show to something political, because the show is made up of people from several different political backgrounds. Right. So I never would have thought about it in that way.
Well, it's just, you know, I guess it's to prove that there are certain aspects of the show that are touchy. You know, people are concerned about, oh gosh, you know, they're riffing this particular movie. I love this particular movie. Well, you know, now they're making fun of it. So now it's taking something away from the movie. I'm not really sure it is. I mean, I think that Mystery Science has done a lot to keep certain movies, I guess, within the public consciousness versus, you know, there not being a Mystery Science Theater, we would never know what Manos, the Hands of Fate was.
And that's a tragedy.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and there was a lot of movies that are part of Mystery Science that I don't think anyone would have ever paid attention to or thought about again. I mean, you mentioned Soul Taker. I mean, I don't think anybody was like on the verge of discovering that movie and making that, you know, something that people would talk about and watch even. Yeah. There is something to be said about what Mystery Science Theater has done in a positive light for you know, B movies.
Speaking of those the B movies themselves, are there any of those B movies that they did on the show that you have been hesitant to do special features for, or have? You
know, not really. I am not that sensitive I have movies that I love, and a lot of movies that I champion are the movies that are a bit misunderstood or neglected. And certainly, like when a movie comes out, oftentimes I'm a person saying, you should go see this movie. This movie is actually very good. People are just painting it in a certain way. You've got to break that down and watch it with different eyes. And so, I mean, I find like when I make my favorite movies of the year list, there's always at least one movie on there that failed, that people just tore apart or didn't want to go see or didn't understand. It's not because, you know, I'm gifted with some kind of insight into how to watch certain movies. It's just I've just always been attracted to movies that tried really hard to do something different, and sometimes you fail. And what's the point of making a cinematic art if you don't take some risk and throw everything on the line? It will work or it won't work. And we shouldn't attack people or berate people just because they made something that didn't quite work. I mean, they made something. How many people out there actually accomplished that? I guess the only Mystery Science Theater movie I feel like should not have been an episode was really not their fault, and that's the film they chose for the MST movie. I really don't think The Silent Earth deserved to be riffed, because it wasn't a bad movie necessarily, but it certainly didn't provide opportunities to make successful riffs. I mean, they tried really hard, and there are some very funny moments in it, but a lot of times those funny moments, they're really based upon something that has nothing to do with the movie itself. Right. You know, they're not riffing on something in the movie. So a lot of the humor in the film is forced, where you get kind of into this trap where you're just making dick and fart jokes, and that's not Mr. Science. I mean, there's a time and place, I guess, for dick and fart jokes, but you know, they were always better than that. And I think with the MST movie, while I do enjoy certain aspects of it, I kind of feel like it just wasn't the right movie.
That's very fair.
I've heard both arguments that it was the right movie. That it was. I mean, either way, whatever is okay with me as long as it coincides with my opinion. So.
Right.
Right. Well, wait. I'll give you an example.
Sure.
A funny scene in The Silent Earth, to me, are derived by looking at a prop or some kind of element in the movie and relating it to something else.
The secret government ego project.
Yeah, exactly. I mean that's not a bad movie. I mean, that's not the movie's fault that looks like, you know, someone, you know, inserting a breakfast pastry into a toaster. I mean, at that time, it probably didn't even occur to them. So they're making a joke about something, but it's really just an observation that this looks like something else. It's not really them making fun of the movie. I think they tried really hard to find things they could make fun of or crack jokes about or play off of, but it just didn't work. And I guess that's the other aspect. I mean, really, Mr. Science is at its best. It's not, you know, trying to be harsh or cruel or anything like that. I mean, it's I think they're just trying to be funny.
Right.
So much ripping these days is just "this sucks" and various synonyms for this. That's always the thing that I point back to Mr. Science, is the fact that they're actually pretty forgiving most of the time.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I don't think that they're trying to be negative. Negative isn't funny.
Mm-hmm.
If you could pick a different movie that they would have done in MST the movie, like what suggestions would you have made?
For the movie itself?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, when I was interviewing them for the documentary about the making of the MST the movie, they were really interested in a few other films, which I don't think would have worked either, but they were interested in, you know, they had watched, you know, Funhouse, the Toby Hooper movie. They watched Funhouse, and they watched a couple of made-for-TV spy films, something that would be sort of akin to
like Agent for Harm or something like that.
Agent for Harm and stuff like that. Yeah, it would sort of be akin to that. And I would bet that Agent for Harm was screened when they were looking at all those films, because Agent for Harm would then come out later. So.
Well, there were a bunch of stipulations, if I'm remembering correctly. Like it had to be It couldn't be pan and scan. It had to be
right. Well,
color. It had to be all this,
Had to be in color.
It had to be color. It had to be science fiction.
Yeah.
That was the main stipulation. And I don't think the format concerned them so much. However, I'm sure that factored in. Agent for Harm was shot as a feature. It was shot as a TV show, brought as a feature, but it was shot on that. It was shot on film, with that in mind. It did end up just becoming a feature versus a pilot. But
it's nice to have that debate about, I do question the debate of it is okay to riff some movies but not others. Do you have a stance on that?
Mystery Science Theater is not made up of a group of really witty guys just throwing out jokes as the episode. I mean, they watch the film, they compile notes, they throw out jokes in the writing room and stuff forth. But I mean, they mold this into something. There are a lot of people that just watch movies and just make fun of stuff. It's not quite as calculated, I guess, if that's the best way of saying it. I mean, it's not something that's planned and then cross-referenced. So, I guess people watch movies and crack jokes and they go, this is the perfect MST movie. And I think that the perfect MST movie, begins with all the right elements coming together and then picking it apart and finding the best way to attack it. So
it needs to be dissected.
Yes.
To understand how it works and therefore how it can be made fun of.
Oh, yeah.
I'll agree with that.
When we say make fun of something, I guess to say make fun of it almost makes it seem like the intention is to tear something down. And I don't really ever get the impression that is their goal.
I mean, my use of make fun of is, in the literal sense, make it fun. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, there's a lot of movies I love that I would still like to hear riff tracks of or something if they're particularly good riff tracks. Now, sometimes they do riffs on, good movies or quote-unquote good movies, but the riff tracks just turns out to be distracting when I'm trying to watch what I consider to be a good movie. I had that problem with The Dark Knight, which in retrospect is not the greatest movie. I found it more engaging than the riffs, even though I'd seen the movie before.
There are certain things associated to certain films that I feel like sometimes they've tackled a movie that I really didn't feel like there was anywhere to go with. Certain movies that are self-aware don't really go off. Like I really don't buy the Sharknado riffing. I mean, it just
Thank you for saying that.
Same.
The movie is designed to be, it's designed to have ridiculous things happening. It's not made to. I mean, it's already making fun of itself. I mean,
they're in on the joke.
Oh, here's Al Roker being attacked by a shark. Isn't that wacky?
Yeah. You can't play off that. I think they did it mainly because the PR around it would be pretty big.
Because it works out both for them and for the asylum who produces it. It's calculated to be bad, but it's transparently calculated. And then there's stuff like Starship Troopers, which they really had no business riffing anyway.
Right.
Because it's a comedy, B, it's a good comedy.
Yeah. Well, Starship Troopers is very much a
satire.
It's a satire.
It's like riffing RoboCop, and that doesn't really work. Unless they riff the new one, because the new one's that one is not self-aware at all.
And I look forward to your documentary about RoboCop. So you've done, I'm trying to count the number in my head. I can't. You've done got to be at least 16 documentaries about movies or topics that were discussed on Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Actually, I can tell you how many I've done, and you're way off.
Am I off in a good way or off in less or more?
More. I've done more. As of the release coming out, that will be my 60th documentary or bonus feature. It's my 5th feature documentary. It is my 42nd featurette for MST.
That's what I said. 42nd. Of the many that you've worked on, are there any moments in particular from a documentary that you absolutely are most proud of?
I mean, there's documentaries I'm proud of for different reasons. Certain things I've done didn't quite work the way I wanted them to, but I still am proud of them. I think with like the Rondo Hatton documentary, I really tapped into something that was a very serious and kind of emotional project. I mean, I wasn't quite prepared for people's responses to it, but I actually watched the Trail of the Creeper, which is on the Brute Man release. Yep. They kind of watched it and were like kind of moved by it. I thought that was really neat. It showed like the softer side of MST. I mean, I was really proud of the stuff I did for the MST, the movie, and certainly for the 25th set, I was really proud of the Return to Eden Prairie. And I mean, this set coming out now with the AIP documentary, I think I put a lot into that. And these are pretty low budget productions, and I really have to kind of stretch the dollar and have very limited resources and very limited time frames to put these together. So just behind the scenes, I mean, it's a race from step one to to the final finish line. So, but I mean, I love I guess I love all of them, but there are certain ones that are more special to me, and I think like the stuff for the MST the movie turned out really well, and the IP coming up, the Rondo. I was a big fan of the idea of what was done for the standalone Manos release that came out before this new restored version came out. I was a fan of the idea of doing a documentary about Jam Handy, but kind of doing it like an instructional video, like it's just an industrial film, an educational film. And so anyone that's watched that and they talk about the Jam Handy piece that I did, I think it just didn't quite translate the way I wanted it to. However, I still think it's fun. I think the first time people just did like, huh? Yeah, it's weird. But I think it's a bit odd because I from the beginning I wanted to tell this story where it is designed like an industrial film, like a Jam Handy short. So it's like this educational short that a random person uses educational film within the educational film to educate a young person, and that was kind of the thing. It was sort of a short within a short, and I thought it was a funny way to approach it. It just didn't. I guess it just didn't catch on the way I thought it would.
I've yet to see that. That sounds like something I need to see, because that sounds like something I would really enjoy. My problem is I have exactly one box set because I have been broke until very recently. So which one is it, Toby? You'll like this. Trust me. 16.
16 has the Santa Claus short on it.
Yeah.
For the doc.
I remember when that was announced, a lot of people were going like, what is 50-year retrospective? What is this? What is this going to be? And people I remember being pleasantly surprised.
I think it caught people off guard, and I think it caught Shout off guard a little bit, because when I turned the project in, they're like, wow, this was not what we were expecting. It's like, well, I pretty excited about the opportunity to A, do something for a Mystery Science Theater box set, but B, kind of shed a little light on the history of Santa Claus, or certainly K. Gordon Murray's Santa Claus, not necessarily the figure of Santa Claus.
Was there anything interesting you ever learned doing a documentary that you were not believed not to be true, but then were found out otherwise when talking to historians and people who worked on the movie, etc.?
The second featurette that I did for an MST release was for BC Yucca Flats, and I was really excited about doing something on it because I thought doing a documentary really gives one the opportunity to understand what went wrong. I always thought there was something a bit alien about BC Yucca Flats, and as I was interviewing people for it, and then I ended up interviewing the cinematographer for it, the actual movie, and And he was telling me about how they were able to achieve what they were doing. And that was, they weren't shooting really with a script. They were kind of shooting with a couple of ideas. And so the dialogue would be inserted later. How do you insert the dialogue? Well, you just don't shoot anyone talking. And I'm like, that makes sense now. You're watching the movie, and you didn't really, it's like you don't really piece it together necessarily, the reasoning behind it. It just seems like sloppy filmmaking. But actually, it's quite brilliant. We don't have a script, but we want to make a movie anyway. Let's just go out into the desert, and we've got tour for a little bit, and we can wedge in these other people we know, and it's just to make a monster movie. We sell it to a drive-in. This is great. This is awesome. We're perfect. And there's something brave, I guess, about Coleman Francis taking that approach. I don't know. It's I mean, it would be the equivalent of now of a kid going out with their iPhone and deciding, I'm going to make a movie. Let's see. Well, we got this kid down the street, and we got this, so it's just kind of neat. I get surprised sometimes about certain things, and then other times the revelation, I guess, it goes to define exactly what the movie is, or what made it inferior, or certainly made it have its reputation as a cult film, or a B movie, or a Z movie.
Coleman's obviously, I would argue he's probably the most interesting subject of any MST film director, because I think he could have been Ed Wood. He just didn't have the luck that Ed Wood had.
Yeah, and Ed Wood really didn't have that cult following until, I mean, even with Ed Wood, I admire these people. I mean, it takes a lot to make a movie. It takes a lot to complete a movie. It takes a lot to get a movie released, especially in that time period. So while we dismiss him now, so he wasn't a good storyteller, and maybe visually he didn't quite understand what to do with the camera, but he did try to express himself in a visual medium, and he did get it released.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's something commendable about that, even if we don't quite understand it.
That's very fair to say. Like, it's better than I could have done at the time, probably, given all the restrictions and such. Josh, do you have any other questions regarding the Kickstarter?
Well, yeah, you're doing this Kickstarter right now for a documentary about Empire Pictures. Talk about how you fell into that.
Doing the bonus features for Mystery Science, I realized that I was sort of documenting the B movies of my parents' or my grandparents' generation. I started thinking, well, I haven't told the story about my generation's B movies and how I discovered them. I started doing a little bit of research, and I thought, well, I'd really love to do a documentary set in the 80s, exploring things that I was interested in when I was a kid. I started looking, well, I kind of want to tell the story about a company in the 80s, and I want to somehow dramatize their rise and fall. And I'd realized, well, I've been a big fan of the Empire releases, ever since I was a kid. One film in particular, which was Eliminators, was one of my favorites. So I thought, well, I'm going to do a little research and see what kind of happened with that particular company. And I realized that I had more questions than there were answers as far as what caused the company to just kind of crash and burn. And so I started digging deeper, and I thought, well, this is a good story. This is a good subject, and it's kind of fun. It's colorful. It is dealing with B-movie type concepts. And it's like my generation's version of the early days of AIP. AIP would blossom and become successful and have much more control of their faculties, if you will. They had really good writers coming in and really good directors. Corman was coming, into his own as a filmmaker, and so things started really clicking. But it had time to season, and Empire didn't. It began and then very quickly ended. It didn't have that period like AIP had, where it starts off a little rough, trying to find our footing, trying to understand what our voice is, and recruit the filmmakers that will be a part of our staff and our team, and what are the actors that could end up being our version of our studio actors and people that we would have under contract. As time progressed, I realized this is it. This is the story, and I just started pursuing it. Filming interviews and gathering material. And as I filmed interviews, it would lead into all kinds of really unique stuff about what it was like to be a company in the 1980s. And a company like Empire was trying to distribute their films into theaters in a time when most lower budgeted independents were just concentrating on the growing VHS market. It factors into that. You have Charles Band, who was very influential in promoting and certainly not really creating, but making people aware of the home video concept in general earlier on. And then, he also got involved with games. He got involved with comics. He got his hands were in all kinds of pies. And so I thought, what is this guy's story? He seems like a big kid who just wants to have a dream factory and just keep manufacturing stuff that relates to his interest and, what happened. That's kind of where it began.
And you've acquired quite a lot of interviews. How do you get people to agree to do so many interviews?
I think that, for the most part, people that lived a story, they really do want to be heard or want to be remembered for their contributions. And it's kind of my responsibility to make sure they are, heard. I really respect a lot of the people that were involved in the Empire days and admire them. They were an influence on me. They made movies that inspired me. They helped me mold myself into the type of filmmaker that would appreciate, this type of low budget, almost organic type of filmmaking. You're really talking about a time where they didn't depend upon what the computer could do for them. They were really creating these things. They were, I say it like the documentary itself is called Celluloid Wizards in the video Wasteland. I consider a lot of these people involved in these films to be magicians or wizards. They're wielding a type of power and a capability to create magic.
And congratulations on meeting your, you just met your goal of $25,000 for the project. So.
Yeah. Gosh, you have no idea how much of a relief that is. That comes really from just a massive support of fans, fans of Empire, and actually fans of Mystery Science. I have a lot of people that were contacting me going, I'm not familiar with Empire, or I wasn't a big fan of those movies, but because Ballyhoo and because Daniel was making this documentary and we love his stuff for MST, we want to see what he's going to do with this feature project. And that means a lot because above all, I am one of you guys. I am a fan. I'm a movie fan. I love this stuff. And from the perspective of Mystery Science, I've devoted 6+ years of my life trying to preserve the show, preserve the history of the show, preserve the people involved with the show, their lives, their contributions, because I didn't want future generations to forget that there was this brilliant series called Mystery Science Theater, and it was engineered by these brilliant comedians and these brilliant designers, and just a massive creative force came together in front of the camera, but behind the camera, and in the offices at Best Brains. There was just really great collective of people that made that show a reality. And now we're seeing a new version of the show blossom, and now a new generation of fans are going to be able to appreciate not only this show, but now they're going to look back at the previous versions and discover it. Having this new series launch, it's just going to do wonders for the history of the show.
That's a very good answer.
Can the show ever truly die? I don't think it can.
No, it can't.
I guess when the sun explodes and kills everyone, I guess at that point I think we can call it quits. But until then...
Well, then it'll be beamed into space.
True.
I think this is going to be the hardest question of all. What are your top 5 favorite Mystery Science Theater episodes? You've already discussed a couple of them.
Okay, so I can't really rank them, so I can state 5 of them. Deathstalker 3 and Santa Claus are 2 of them. I love Pod People.
Good choice.
I think that Pod People is just, I mean, it's just classic. Just, I mean, from beginning to end, it's just a lot of fun. I certainly love it. I mean, I don't want to say Manos, but, you know, I never saw Manos until I saw it as a Mystery Science Theater episode, so it was sort of a double shock for me. So, I mean, it did make a lasting impression, so much to the fact that when I was asked to be involved in doing the documentary for the restored version, I just kind of jumped to it because I was interested in helping people understand why that movie is so surreal and deliberately slow. I mean, deliberately, I don't know. It puts you in some type of trance state watching it.
I've actually been rewatching it, the Riff Tracks live version, and I've come to the realization it's kind of like a waking nightmare.
Yeah,
in a way.
I love Final Sacrifice. I think that is probably one of the stronger sci-fi era shows.
Yep.
It certainly has its cult following as an episode, because when I do the MST night at DragonCon, you know, over 700 people show up for that thing, and I always encourage people to dress up like their favorite characters, and there's at least a couple of Rousdowers there. So I find that kind of funny.
In their defense, it is a lot easier to dress up as Rousdower than it is to dress up as the horror of Party Beach. So,
or it conquered the world.
Yeah,
that is true.
Yeah. I don't even think they were dressing up as Rousdower. I think those were just people wearing their normal clothes.
Hey, thank you for being on here. This was a really great, very illuminating interview.
Well, thank you.
Like, I mean that. Like, I've learned a lot, and I like that.
Well, learning is good. Learning is power.
Yes, power. Power I can use to defeat my enemies. I don't really know how this factors into that, but I'll figure something out. But again, thank you again for agreeing to appear on the show. This was really cool to have.
Oh, no problem. I'm happy to be whatever help I can be.
Your Kickstarter has 36 hours left to go at time of recording. When this goes up, it'll be about a day. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We appreciate you guys checking out the Facebook page and all that lately. Over 1,000 people looked at our post about the MST Kickstarter, and that was awesome. Thank you, everybody, for listening again. I'm Toby Mobius.
I'm Bolt Riffrock.
And I am Daniel Griffith.
And this has been the MSTieCast. Please don't look at my underpants. Please don't look at my underpants.